Good morning and welcome to the We Can't Wait action meeting hosted by the ALS Association in order to provide a platform for people living with ALS to present their views directly to the FDA and to industry sponsors about the urgent need to gain timely access to potentially beneficial new therapies. I'm Scott Kaufman, Chair-elect of the ALS Association Board of Trustees, but much more importantly, caregiver to my son, Stephen, who was diagnosed at 27 and has been living with ALS for 9 years. Emphasis here on the word living. I remember the early years and the hope we both felt each week driving from our home in Palo Alto up to the Forbes Norris Clinic in San Francisco to participate in the Cytokinetics phase 3 trial. Now, it turns out that Stephen was on the placebo and the drug didn't meet its targets, but we still felt like we were part of the process of moving the science forward. I remember the joy of wheeling Stephen into place on his wedding day nearly 6 years ago to marry my remarkable daughter-in-law, Jenny. And then 3 years ago, grandson Elijah arrived. Those moments and thousands of others, both big and small, are what every person wants for their life. And every person living with ALS is no different. They want nothing more. And just as importantly, they want nothing less. Now, during this 1-hour virtual meeting, FDA and industry officials will have the opportunity to hear directly from members of our community about how they view the importance of new therapies, even if they only offer incremental benefits. And as you'll hear throughout our session today, these incremental benefits are significant and meaningful to our community, and not just statistics on a clinical trial spreadsheet. Our agenda today features a series of speakers living with ALS, and I want to thank Team Gleason and I Am ALS for their help with this process. Also joining us today are key officials at the FDA, including Dr. Patrizia Cavazzoni, Director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, Dr. Peter Stein, Director of the Office of New Drugs, and Dr. Billy Dunn, Director of the Office of Neuroscience. These individuals, along with other FDA officials, will appear on camera as they listen to the voices of people living with ALS. And Dr. Cavazzoni will share some brief remarks towards the end of the meeting. Industry representatives and all other participants are in listen-only mode, and we thank them for their attendance as well. Now, look, I realize that a 60-minute session doesn't provide the opportunity to fully express the needs and opinions of our diverse community, but we view this forum as an important opportunity for members to speak directly to regulatory and industry leaders at a very critical juncture for people living with ALS. I'm also mindful that there have been sessions like this before that haven't produced any tangible results. We can't wait means that it's time to change that dynamic between industry and our community and between regulators and our community. And that's why we're here today. And since we knew we couldn't hear from everyone, the association provided a platform through which all members of our community could upload their views and perspectives. This information has been compiled and shared with the FDA and industry colleagues. And if you'd like to share your thoughts with the FDA, this platform will remain open for the next 48 hours, and you can access it at als.org/FDA. That's als.org/FDA. Now, each of our speakers has been asked to limit their remarks to 3 to 4 minutes. And those with communication challenges obviously will have some flexibility, and we'll try to stick to these time limits to ensure that all of our speakers can be heard within the allotted time for the meeting. We thank the FDA for consenting to our request at this meeting that it be live streamed, and I know we're joined with people all across the country. It's also being recorded and will be shared with the broader community later today. So let's get started. In a moment, I'll turn the mic over to Kalanit Ballas, CEO of the ALS Association, to lay out the context for today's session. And then you'll hear unique perspectives from 8 people living with ALS. Dr. Cavazzoni of the FDA will then offer some brief remarks, and if there's time left over, I'll conduct a Q&A session with our participants. It's now my pleasure to introduce Collinate Ballas.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everyone. I just want to take a few minutes to make some opening statements, but first, welcome, and thank you to all of our participants, especially those living with ALS, for joining us on this important session. Scott, I also want to say thank you for agreeing to serve as our moderator today, and to the FDA officials and our industry sponsors for agreeing to participate. So today, the ALS community, through our speakers, will bring the experience of living with ALS and their views on faster access to therapies directly to the FDA and to industry. They're also going to share perspectives on how important topics such as what risks they are willing to take for potential impact on how they feel, function, and live. And yes, thankfully, there are specific experimental trials and therapies impacted by today's discussion. We have been clear and public in our position that the FDA should use its regulatory authority as set out in the 2019 guidance to provide the earliest and widest possible access to the compound of amyloid that has completed a well-designed phase 2 clinical trial that is safe and met its endpoint. The ALS Association and IMALS submitted a petition many months ago signed by over 50,000 people in our community, calling for AMX 0035 to be granted approval as soon as possible. So a little bit of background. In 2019, the ALS guidance was developed, but it was developed through a laborious multi-year collaboration with over 100 stakeholders between FDA, scientists, industry, and people living with ALS and their caregivers, some of which are no longer with us. Right now, I'm concerned that the FDA does not appear to be using this guidance as the framework to do everything they can to get effective treatments to people with ALS as fast as possible, as they said they would. It's even more concerning considering that almost every ALS trial designed since then was created with this guidance in mind. I call on the FDA to show people with ALS and the scientific community that it does intend to follow the guidance and do all it can to bring effective treatments to people with ALS as soon as possible. We've been equally direct in urging Amylyx to provide expanded access to treatment while the regulatory review process unfolds. If a trial sponsor has evidence that their treatment will benefit the ALS community, and I think Amylyx does, they have an obligation to make it as widely available as possible as soon as possible. I'm concerned that we're out of step with the global community, and this sends mixed messages to all of our stakeholders, our sponsors, people living with ALS, and the global community that is inherently intertwined. I'm concerned that these mixed messages lead to unintended consequences. For example, individuals turning to a black market to try to get therapies they believe do work, and an underground network most willing to supply those drugs. Unregulated, often completely misrepresented, and potentially dangerous. These aren't possibilities because we know this is happening. But this convening, while taking place in that context, is about much more than a single drug. This is about how we end ALS. And until then, how do we make it livable? We must have multiple effective treatments, even if those treatments have modest benefits, so that people living with ALS today can hold on until we find cures. As Scott said, we've had this conversation with the FDA before, and we should not have to keep having the same conversation. We should not have to ask people with ALS to come back year after year to speak to the risks they are willing to take. It's unfair, and it's really unjust. Let me be clear. It is for the people living with ALS to determine the risks they're willing to take and the value they see in the benefits, not anyone else. Today's discussion is about ensuring FDA officials and industry have a clear understanding of how our community values the potential for any benefit, small or large. That might mean extra months of being able to walk, talk, breathe independently. Most importantly, those really important life moments Scott just talked about. whether it's a graduation, a wedding, a birth. A modest gain may allow a person to see the next modest treatment. What may seem as modest to some can be deeply important to people living with a progressive and fatal disease. These incremental steps might be the bridge we need to help people stay alive long enough until we can find a cure, which is always our ultimate vision. We're going to hear a lot more about this. So I ask, as we listen through the next hour, in an unfair, unequal, and unjust world, can we collectively, all with an important role in the ALS community, lean in, use the 2019 guidance and expanded access to find a way to accelerate and get promising and safe treatments to people with ALS. Thank you again to everyone in our ALS community, all of those who you will hear from, and those who are joining through our live stream, to our FDA, our FDA, and to the sponsors for coming here today. I really, really appreciate it. So, Scott, I'm going to turn the microphone back over to you.
Hey, thanks, Colonnade. Now on to the heart of the matter. Our first speaker is John Robinson from Parrish, Florida. John?
Thank you, Scott. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Robinson, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the ALS Association and a recently retired military veteran of nearly 32 years of active federal service. I was diagnosed with ALS in the spring of 2019 after having lived with the disease for over a year. Today, you will hear compelling stories about the personal impact of ALS on my friends and colleagues and the risks they are willing to accept to preserve their lives. I'll open this dialogue by asking you to consider impact and risk in a different way, because sometimes we lose sight of the broader impact of every diagnosis of ALS. As you may know, 1 in 6 persons diagnosed with ALS is a military veteran. In fact, veterans are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ALS as those who've never served. But lost in this statistic is that many of these veterans are still serving on active duty at the time of their diagnosis, and such was the case for me. At the time of my diagnosis, I was part of the leadership team of one of the Army's largest combat arms branches. 43,000 soldiers in the active component and Army National Guard, an institution nearly triple the size of the Food and Drug Administration. Losing a key leader in an organization of that size is not like pulling a toy boat from a bathtub. The water doesn't immediately close around the hole. The investment in training, education, and leader development cannot simply be replicated by next man up. As the government has declared ALS a military service-connected disability, we must see it for what it really is, a threat to our country's national security. Moreover, if America's sons and daughters truly understood these horrifying statistics, our recruiting pipeline could expectedly be at risk. Yet another threat to our national security. Are these the risks we're willing to accept in defense of our country? Still, for every ALS patient diagnosed, there is also a caregiver, often a family member, who finds their own world impacted forever, and again, society suffers as well. My spouse is a nurse practitioner and a public servant like you. She has cared for, excuse me. She has cared for our soldiers, airmen, and their families in 3 different military hospitals. And at the time of my diagnosis, she was a primary care provider in the Indian Health Service with an empanelment of 1,100 patients serving our Native American population in Southwest Oklahoma. As I now require full-time care, she too has been involuntarily stripped from her profession, tearing her from her patients who miss her dearly. Every ALS patient and every caregiver impacted by this disease has a similar story, and we will share some of those compelling stories with you this morning. The loss to society of their skills and humanity leaves holes never filled the same way again. I ask you to consider our society as a water reservoir and our healthcare system like the Hoover Dam. Every diagnosis of ALS is a crack in that dam. There are drugs and treatments before you for your consideration. These therapies can repair some of the cracks in the dam. Not all of them, to be sure, and indeed, not every repair will be perfect. But every repaired crack reduces the needless loss to our society, giving the scientific community the time and space to more permanently repair the entire dam. Ladies and gentlemen, please help us repair our dam. Thank you, and good morning.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Steve Krause from Hico, Texas.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. My name is Sunny Browse. I'm a 34-year-old dog and cat mom from Hico, Texas. I'm an aunt, a sister, a friend, and a daughter. I found my purpose in this world early, to love others. And every day I find gentle reminders to fulfill this calling, whether it's in person, through social media, or in prayer. I take this job, this calling by a higher power, very seriously. In August of 2014, I joined the rest of the world in lifting a bucket of ice water over my head and drenching myself in the name of ALS awareness. It was satisfying to take part in a greater effort, to participate in the soaking phenomenon that had gone viral. 5 months later, on January 20th, 2015, I was diagnosed with limb-onset sporadic amyotrophic lateral sclerosis at the age of 27. As I am halfway through year 6 living with this disease, it is in my best interest to try any therapy that my doctor and I agree on making sense for me. Making sense is a relative qualifier and one that has evolved through my partnership with the multidisciplinary team. Playing a zone defense against a terminal opponent. Any benefits or shared victories with the team and any losses are crucial to the next round's success. Access to therapies that have proven to be safe, proven to have benefits, and administered in collaboration with my multidisciplinary team is the obvious next step in this journey. My ALS is completely different than anyone you're meeting today or have met in your life, and expanded access is how I can contribute to finding a cure for ALS. This is where my purpose in life impacts the ALS community. It takes my love for others and makes it a quantifiable action, combining research and science with my dedication to the greatest good of people living with ALS. My hope is that you remember my face. Remember that I'm a fan of the artist formerly known as Prince in sports analogies, and that I'm asking for expanded access to therapies that will allow my story and my life's purpose to continue. We can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. I appreciate the multiple Prince references. Our next speaker is Sandy Morris from Truckee, California, and Sandy has chosen to record her message today, and she is also here with us. Welcome, Sandy.
People living with ALS want to live. Plain and simple. We want to live. I reread the 2013 FDA hearing transcripts with tears in my eyes. Absolutely nothing has changed. You have not changed. ALS has not changed. The only thing that has changed are the faces of people with ALS. The speakers with ALS are gone. They died waiting. I watched the 2018 meeting with great enthusiasm. My friend Corey created a survey taken by 600 people with ALS that quantitatively showed that we absolutely want to be able to access investigational therapies and that we have a sky-high acceptance of the risk benefit due to the atrocity of this disease. To no avail. Corey died waiting, along with so many of my friends. I submitted a comment at the 2018 meeting suggesting we could save everyone a little time by re-listening to the all-day 2013 session. An FDA leader said, "We hear you, but you didn't." Because here we are again in mid-2021, and our biggest fear is coming true. The science is arriving, and we are not ready. We had 2 investigational therapies that recently failed to result in drug approvals. One of the trials I had the privilege of being a part of. It slowed my progression significantly and did the same for many others, but it wasn't enough. The second one is also disturbing, as its trial met its primary endpoint and was statistically significant. It showed slower progression in the therapy participants, but it wasn't enough. You said we need more trials, more people on placebo, and more years that none of us have to spare. We all nod our heads and agree that ALS is a heterogeneous disease needing flexibility. But then our trial design and your drug approval process don't support this at all. One singular drug is not going to work for everyone. What we have today isn't going to cure me, but it may give me time while something more effective is developed. We are not asking for a separate regulatory system just for this disease. We are asking you to recognize that the system doesn't work uniformly, and people living with ALS and other rare and neurodegenerative diseases need assurance that we won't die waiting for access if an effective therapy is developed while we are still alive. I am here today to say that I am dying waiting. Please hear me this time. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants to say, please hear me. Please hear us and act now. It's not within my power to save my life. It's within yours. Please hear us and act now when we tell you again that we gratefully accept the risks and side effects of being able to take investigational therapies that could prolong our lives. Please hear us and act now when I remind you that the biggest risk has already happened to us the day of our diagnosis. Living with ALS is as risky as it gets. Please hear us and act now when we ask you to think about this. It is much easier for us to set up our assisted suicides than it is to access investigational therapies. Let that sink in. And for a personal testimony, I am all signed up. I just need to choose my death day. Without the option of investigational therapies, I will schedule my death day, as so many brave ALS people have done before me. Think about how much better it would be if we were able to die trying rather than die waiting. We are dying while we wait for a scientific home run. We are dying quickly in the most brutal manner. We are dying waiting. Remember, we want the chance to live. Is it really necessary to keep telling our leaders this? 2013, 2018, 2021, nothing has changed about this. We want to live.
Thank you, Sandy. Our next speaker is Troy Fields from Tampa Bay, Florida. Troy?
Good morning. My name is Troy Fields, native of Puerto Rico, currently living in Tampa Bay, Florida. I was diagnosed with ALS in June of 2018. I'm a 57-year-old son, husband, father of 4, grandfather of 3, brother, and friend. As I consider what is to come in my ALS journey, I hope for one of two things: that I get a reprieve from this death sentence through a cure. And if that's not possible, that at least it slows down its progression through effective treatments to buy me more time, maybe enough time for another life extending or even life saving treatment to become available. When you're given 3 to 5 years to live, even a few months makes an enormous difference. For me, this could mean walking my daughter down the aisle in her wedding, or witnessing my grandson's birth, or another Christmas with the family. After all, who among us who has not lost a loved one does not wish they could have just another day with them? Currently, promising treatments are in various stages of review by the FDA, and that gives me reason for cautious optimism. Like an inmate on death row waiting for a call from the governor, wondering if I get to live or die. These new treatments are reviewed for efficacy and safety. In other words, to determine the benefits and risk of the drug. However, I would make the argument that any consideration of risk and benefits must be made in the context of the patients and the impact the disease has on them. For me and the the thousands of people living with ALS, along with their loved ones, the threshold of risk and the definition of benefits is significantly different from those of you making the determination to approve treatments. Because unless it is your own life on the line, you simply do not get it. To be clear, the difference is not recklessness, for we do not want to trade one premature death for another, although most of us would take that chance if there was a probability that we can beat this. But we are willing to take more chances to extend life than our healthier counterparts. We have everything to gain. For us, there is no such thing as a modest gain in life expectancy that would eliminate a potential treatment from consideration. Any additional gain in life expectancy is welcome. Urgency is another key consideration. The pace of decisions must be faster than the pace of the disease. We're operating on borrowed time, and every 90 minutes the process is delayed in meetings and discussions means another father or mother or spouse is lost. It is the difference between looking at an advancing clock with no set deadline and a regressive clock racing to zero. Time becomes more valuable because it is more scarce. Decisions regarding our lives must be made with the same level of urgency as a situation merits. ALS takes away so much from us. It took away my ability to play catch with my grandchildren and hugging my loved ones, and I was a hugger. It is taking away my chance of living a life most people take for granted. The risks and benefits of ALS treatments are perceived differently for those in the fight than for those in the sidelines, and the urgency is far greater. After all, it is our lives on the line. So today, I ask the FDA, as well as those sitting through this particularly important meeting, to adjust your perspectives as you review potential treatments, to match that of the people whose lives are at stake, and to trust us to weigh the risk and benefits of such treatment based on our specific situation, guided by our doctors, and to give us the opportunity to decide how much of a chance we're willing to take to preserve this most important of rights, the right to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy, and my apologies for mispronouncing your location, Champa Bay, Florida. Our next speaker is Carrie Meistrick from Knoxville, Tennessee.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Carrie Meistrick, and I was diagnosed with ALS on June 15th, 1998, when I was 28 years old. I had a wonderful life, 3 children, aged 5 and under, and many dreams, including growing old with my college sweetheart. I had noticed a weakness in my wrist, twitching and cramping in one hand, and severe fatigue. My doctor thought maybe it was carpal tunnel. No big deal. But when it became difficult to open toothpaste, and I finally went to the doctor, 3 letters changed my life forever. ALS. In 1998, there was only one FDA approved drug, Rayosol, which had a modest benefit of 3 months extended survival time. Today, we only have one more approved drug, Adderall, which seems to only slow progression for a small subset of fast progressors. This simply will not do. During these 23 years, I have watched hundreds of friends die from this awful disease. It is so discouraging to know the time and money it takes to get one drug from pre-clinical development to FDA approval. Time most of us don't have. It is encouraging to see the number of drugs in the clinical pipeline today. Unfortunately, slow progressors like me can't participate in these trials due to the usual exclusion criteria. My time will run out too, just like every other ALS patient. I want to see all my kids graduate college and get married, and I want the chance to enjoy grandchildren with my husband. I need access to promising treatments to make this possible. I recently had a vaccine that was not approved by the FDA to prevent a virus I might get. Would I jump at the chance to try a drug that might help me live longer from a disease that I am dying from if it has already proven to be safe and well tolerated, but isn't approved yet? Absolutely. Please give me that chance. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Our next speaker is Jay Quinlan from New Orleans, Louisiana, with his wife and caregiver, Stephanie. Jay, Stephanie?
Ladies and gentlemen, My name is Jay Quinlan Ann. With me is my wife of 25 years, mother of my 2 children, and principal caregiver, Stephanie. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this morning. After a year of investigating the cause of atrophy in my left hand, including a needless elbow surgery, I was diagnosed with ALS in August 2016 at the age of 48. I am now 53 and have lived with the understanding that my body is withering away due to this disease for almost 5 years. One primary realization that I have come to, and I suspect all ALS patients share, is that once we are diagnosed, we are on the clock. Our time is running out. In an effort to forestall time running out for me, my efforts have included going to Japan in pursuit of edaravone, Radicava, treatment in 2017 that had not yet been approved in the United States. I have also chosen to be trained in an effort to prolong my life. In preparation of my comments for you today, I reviewed the September 2019 amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, developing drugs for treatment guidance for industry document. My understanding is that the process leading to the formation of this document began sometime in 2013 with the testimony before the FDA by ALS patients and advocates. While I am admittedly unfamiliar with the inner workings of the process leading to the creation of the guidance document, I can't help but question what took 6 years. Remember, ALS patients are on the clock. In reviewing the guidance document, I was struck by the number of times it suggested or directed what sponsors can or should do in seeking approval for therapies for ALS patients. What I found lacking were declarations of what the FDA can and will do to expedite approvals for ALS therapies. Before being forced to retire due to ALS, I spent my career in state and federal employment as a criminal prosecutor. As a result, I am familiar with instances of government's risk-averse tendency and the prospect of shifting burdens to industry. Certainly, there are times where this is appropriate. However, there are also times where it is appropriate for government to self-evaluate. Page 3 of your guidance document states, FDA has long stressed the appropriateness of exercising regulatory flexibility in applying the statutory standards to drugs for serious diseases with unmet medical needs, while preserving appropriate assurance of safety and effectiveness. Also, page 7 of the guidance document adds, when making regulatory decisions about drugs to treat ALS, FDA will consider patient tolerance for risk and the serious and life-threatening nature of the condition in the context of statutory requirements for safety and efficacy. My challenge to you is to evaluate whether the FDA is doing all it can to give patients access to and to expedite approval of promising ALS therapies as quickly as possible. You have shown through your recent handling approvals for COVID vaccines that flexibility and expediting processes are possible. I urge you to entertain what you can do to apply that same flexibility to the ALS community. Just as the country has been on the clock with regard to COVID, the ALS community has and remains on its own clock as well. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Thank you, Jay and Stephanie. Our next speaker is Tommy May from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Tommy?
Thank you, Scott. To those that are here representing the FDA, thanks for giving us the opportunity to share the journey of pals and cows. Simply stated, it has been a long journey for some and too short of a journey for others. My name is Tommy May, and I was diagnosed with ALS on December 7th, 2005. Obviously, my progression has been slow. I've taken Riluzole since day one and have participated in a cocktail initiative not used in any clinical trials. However, I do have similar frustration as those that are newly diagnosed relative to the lack of progress toward finding a cure for this dreadful disease. I live with a longer term progression. Also, I represent many others that are short term progressors whom are desperate for some type of hope. So many of our pals are young with young families. Many have no understanding of why it takes so long to find a cure or a process that will slow down this disease. For years, there has been talk. It's just around the corner. For most, we are unable to believe there is change in the immediate future or even in the future, and time is of the essence. For our families, we are desperate for something, anything that will give us hope. Recently, I was talking to a family in which the pal was on eye gaze, and I was visiting with he and his wife to see if there was anything I could do to help them. As I was preparing to end the conversation, the cow said, "Hold on, Tommy. John is trying to say something on his machine." I waited, and the words that have haunted me came forth. "Tommy, please tell me something that will give us hope." It is that hope that is so important to our families. Our life expectancy is short, and we don't have many more years, or in many cases, another year. We are transitioning to what we know to believe is the end of life. We are not interested in the long term. We are desperate for the here and now. We will fight hard, but we also know there has not been anything that would give us the hope we need until now. We have read about compound AMX 035 that has shown slower decline in disease progression. We know it has proven to be safe and well tolerated. Thus, we are, yes, desperate to have the compound available through expanded access. So consider this what if scenario. What if I take the drug and it turns out to have no benefit and I will still have the hassle and the cost associated with taking the drug? Well, while disappointed, I would consider associated cost a good investment and positive steps forward. What if I do not take the drug until the trial is over and it turns out to have had a benefit that I will now have foregone and the disease progressed the additional 2 years or so? I know I would consider it a major lost opportunity. So finally, what if I take it now and it adds 6 months to my life and maintains improved functions for a longer period of time? I believe this would create a belief and trust that there is truly hope. For me, the risk reward favors moving forward, considering the disease is terminal and the bulk of the pals are faster progressors. So clearly, time is of the essence for those pals, while further delays represent more of the same. While statistics alone might suggest delay, we're dealing with real people that cannot wait. Allow me to tell my friend there is truly reason for hope. please help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Our final speaker this morning is Larry Falavina from Apex, North Carolina. Larry?
Good morning. My name is Larry Falavina, and my ALS was caused by a mutation of the SOD1 gene. I've been married for 20 years. I have 2 teenage boys who are very active, as I used to be before my diagnosis, but now I'm no longer able to mountain bike with my wife or play soccer or go surfing with my sons. ALS has robbed us of the chance to make those memories. So I'm here not only asking for treatment for me, but also for my children. And I'm asking the FDA to help make sure that my boys never have to worry about ALS. You know, I'm grateful to God that my progression has been slow, but it's still a progression. I don't know when the last day is that I'll be able to talk or feed myself. And it's kind of like ALS is a giant weight hanging over my head. And one day it will drop and potentially even drop on my kids. No one knows how much time they have on this earth, but everyone wants as much time as possible. So therapies that even provide a few extra months for people with ALS means that they get to make more memories with their family. Maybe they get a hug from their grandchildren. Maybe they get that trip to the beach. If the opportunity exists, even for a small group of patients, they need to be given the chance to get that extra time. And when you're living with a disease where you aren't going to be able to move or eat or talk, and you know that eventually you will die, you're not really worried about side effects. Even if a therapy doesn't wind up helping you live longer, even if it doesn't work, at least you know that you've tried everything possible. I know that I would rather go down swinging than know that I'd never been given a chance to live that longer life. Even right now, I'm in a clinical trial. It's a drug that hasn't been fully vetted. It may have significant side effects. Even the way in which the drug is administered is a risk. But for me, it's worth that risk, because right now, that's the only opportunity I have to live a longer and better quality life. As you know, and as you've heard today, the FDA has mechanisms in place to fast track the approval of treatments when they're shown to have some benefit. For example, in the 1987, the FDA fast tracked the approval of AZT for AIDS patients. It went from Petri dish to being approved for patients in less than 2 years, even though AZT had significant side effects. But with no other options, it was deemed unethical to keep that treatment from patients. Now the ALS patients, we need the FDA to take that same approach to treatments for ALS, because just like AIDS in the early 80s, getting an ALS diagnosis is a death sentence. Potential treatments should not be kept from ALS patients, even if there's a small chance of slowing the disease, despite the risk of possible side effects. The good news is that there are some treatments available, and there's even more in the pipeline. And now we need the FDA to do its part and make these drugs available to the ALS community as soon as possible. So I thank you for taking the time to listen to patients' voices today. And now I sincerely hope that you'll take action on what you've heard today, because without action, people with ALS will continue to be denied the chance for more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. So we've heard from 8 speakers today, 8 people living with ALS. And while each of their stories are unique, there is a remarkable consistency to what they've had to say. And so we're now going to hear from members of the Food and Drug Administration. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Patrizia Cavazzoni, Director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Dr. Cavazzoni, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to thank the Scott and Kalanid for inviting us to be part of this important session today. And I'm going to say a few words on behalf of FDA and all my colleagues at FDA today who have joined us. First, I thank you is not enough for the people suffering from ALS who have shared with us today their experiences and their journey through this horrible disease, and the caregivers who are traveling that road with them. And I have to tell you that I am personally, very moved by this session. It is my first one. I have not been at CEDAR for very long, as you know, and I am really very, very touched by the testimonials that we have heard today. What I will say today reflects, I will use the we and the I because they're very much the same. And sometimes I will use the I because I'm not really shy when it comes to sharing my own personal views. Clearly, there is no doubt in our mind and in my mind that the path through to finding a cure for ALS is in taking incremental steps and in making drugs available that lead to incremental improvement. We have a success history from cancer. And we have seen that over the past 10, 20 years, the path towards finding a cure for cancer has all been about developing drugs and making drugs available that lead to incremental improvement. For that to happen, there has to be a very strong partnership between people living with ALS, their caregivers, FDA, and drug developers. And clearly, today's session is a testimonial of the fact that the people living with ALS and their caregivers are clearly going above and beyond when it comes to doing their part. And so I agree that FDA and drug developers have a big role to play and need to do their part. And let me tell you a little bit about sort of our views of regulatory flexibility. And I've heard a lot about this and I'm really taking it to heart. We have a finite set of regulatory tools that we can use when we review drugs, when we think about approving drugs or making them available. And I agree, and we agree that these tools should be deployed with a maximum flexibility and speed when it comes to drugs that offer potential hope for devastating diseases such as ALS. And I also want to speak to the role of developers, since you're kind enough to give me a few minutes to share my views. Drug developers who are developing drugs for ALS and other neurodegenerative diseases really need to take stock of what has happened in oncology over the past decade. And what we have learned through oncology is that a really important aspect of developing drugs that offer incremental improvement and therefore incremental hope is to really double down on understanding the biology of the disease and to develop drugs that really are aimed towards precise targets once the biology of the disease is identified, understanding that ALS is a heterogeneous disease. And so there are probably, many different targets and a lot that we don't know. Last but not least, I want to say something about expanded access. We and I recognize the importance of expanded access. It's unquestionable that it has to be part of what we offer to people suffering from ALS as we continue to also do controlled clinical trials and to study potential therapies. And so from FDA's and CEDAR perspective, we stand ready to work with industry sponsors to make investigational therapies available through expanded access when that is appropriate. And as you know, there are factors to take into consideration, but I certainly want to assure you of our view that we view expanded access as something that has to be part of the package and what we offer to patients and the caregivers. So Let me finish by thanking you again. I am incredibly grateful for having been invited to today's session. I hope that the sponsors and the drug developers who have joined today will also have listened carefully and have taken stock of what we have heard. And I really look forward to more interactions with the community, with people suffering from ALS, their caregivers, and all those who really want to get us to the point where we have not only one therapies, but many, many therapies that will get us to really make substantial gains in offering options and solutions. So thank you again.
And thank you very much, Dr. Cavazzoni, to you and your colleagues for listening this morning, and most importantly, for hearing us. Thanks again to all of our speakers and industry colleagues who joined us this morning. And if we can, let's bring everyone in our panel back on screen. We are deeply grateful to all of our participants and the entire ALS community for continuing to advocate for timely access to potentially beneficial therapies. And as you heard so compellingly from Sandy Morris, listening sessions were conducted in 2013 and 2018, and all of the participants from 2013 have passed away. You know, I can't think of a more poignant manifestation of why it is that we can't wait. The people on this call should not have to have this same set of conversations ever again. To reiterate what we've heard this morning in several different ways, only people living with ALS should be making decisions about what risks they're willing to take when it comes to experimental therapies that have been deemed safe. On behalf of all of our speakers, we need the FDA to reaffirm that it's committed to the 2019 ALS guidance document and to ensure that the United States continues to play a leading role in ALS drug development. And we need drug companies to commit to providing expanded access each and every time they have the evidence that a promising new drug is effective for at least some members of our community. Look, we all desperately hope for a cure for ALS, but until we get there, we need to ensure that there are multiple treatments made available immediately, even if they have modest effects. As you heard numerous times this morning, those modest incremental effects have the potential to turn ALS from a fatal disease into a livable one. We can't wait any longer. My thanks again to everyone in our ALS community for tuning in. A reminder that you can post your thoughts at als.org/FDA, and a full recording of this meeting will be available later today on our website at als.org. Take good care. Bye for now.